All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. First up, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Questions can be posted in the question and answer function, and we'll aim to address them all in the question and answer section at the end. Don't worry though, all the questions will be recorded, so any that we don't get to live can be answered afterwards. The webinar will also be recorded and circulated for next week. So, I'd like to start by with an acknowledgement of country. The Sydney Dementia Network are on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge sovereignty was never ceded. I stand with Indigenous people to build reconciliation and a strong future. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the session today. I encourage you to include the name of the land on which you're joining from today into the chat function below. So the purpose of today is to provide you all with an outline of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation grants available in 2025, as well as insights and useful tips on preparing your grant application from reviewers, people with a living experience of dementia, and previous recipients of grants who will hopefully share with you their all-important tips and tricks for what makes a successful application across the various funding categories. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the day, Dr. Annette Moxey, who is the General Manager of Dementia Australia's Research Foundation.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see my slides. So we're back again for another year of grant applications and funding, which we're really excited about. So today I'd just like to give a little bit of information about the 2025 Dementia Grants Program. Everything is detailed in our information for applicants booklet, but today I'll just provide some highlights of that and just some changes of what's happened with our application process this year. So briefly, our Dementia Grants Program provides funding into a range of topics all related to dementia. So we fund everything from lab-based biomedical research all the way through to psychosocial work that may be to improve the care of someone living with dementia. With 2025, we fund a broad range of projects again. We fund researchers across all different stages of their career, but maintain a particular focus on supporting early and mid-career researchers. So we like to attract talented graduates to the field, and then with the aim to retain them in the field so that they're the ones that go on and make some groundbreaking research. So funding varies year to year depending on what we receive in donations. So this year we've got project grants, fellowships, travel grants, research translation grant, and also a clinical practice postgraduate stipend. So firstly, our project grants, these are intended to help researchers establish their career in dementia, and it's through time-limited sort of pilot projects so that you can get some pilot data and use that information to help your applications in the future when you apply to NHMRC and MRFF. The awards are over 2 years and there's up to 8 available. Our postdoctoral fellowship scheme aims to provide researchers with an opportunity to fast-track their progress towards becoming an independent researcher. So we've got salary and research expenses included here. If your salary is greater than $118,000 a year, your university or another funding source will need to top it up. Our fellowships are intended to be the primary fellowship. So you can't, if you have an investigator grant, for example, through NHMRC, you won't be able to use our fellowships to top that up. And also the indexation may be applied each year. So as wages increase, we should be able to cover that. One award will be supported by Race Against Dementia, and it's in the areas of prevention and treatment. This award is geared towards sort of lab-based and clinical type research, and there's lots of mentoring opportunities through the Race Against Dementia's fellowship scheme. So you'll get to meet other fellows from across the year, so they across the world. So they fund people in the UK, South Africa, America. So it's a really highly prestigious award, up to 5 years in duration. So this brings me to timelines, because there has been, it's a little bit confusing over the past couple of years. We have a 5-year postdoc and also our usual Research Foundation 3-year postdoc. So this year, just all applications should be a 3-year proposal. All the Race Against Dementia fellows are reviewed at the 3-year mark anyway. And so if your progress is satisfactory, you'll be able to outline what you would do in the next 2 years then. If you would like to, in your application and you're considering a Race Against Dementia fellowship, you can sort of outline briefly what plans you might have for years 4 and 5 in your application, or you can even mention it at interview about what your future plans will be. So as mentioned, there will be an interview for the Race Against Dementia fellowship, but also if you've been shortlisted for the 3-year postdoctoral fellowship through us, if the scores are really competitive and similar, you may be asked to do an interview for that scheme as well. So if you're asked to complete an interview, it's important that you do a short 10-minute presentation that's clear and engaging and can be delivered to someone who, without a scientific background, would be able to understand clearly. So mid-career fellowships, that aims to support researchers to continue towards becoming leaders in the field, and provides them with an opportunity to establish their own research teams. Again, if your salary is greater than $157,000 per annum, other funding sources will need to top that up, and indexation will also be applied. And as mentioned, an interview might be required for the mid-career fellowships as well. Travel grants are designed to assist researchers to travel nationally and internationally to learn new techniques, build their networks with other research teams, and just continue their professional development as a researcher. Although the award aims to establish that professional development, there are still opportunities to involve people with a living experience of dementia in travel activities. For example, you may like to invite a person with living experience to be a co-presenter at a conference. You might go and visit advocacy groups in other countries, or you even may get them to review your application in the first instance to make sure that it all makes sense. The duration of travel is up to 6 months. And if visiting another institution, you will need to get a letter of support from them, just to say that they're happy to accept you for the amount of time that you'll be visiting them. So that moves on to our Dr. Stewart and Bonnie Bartle Research Translation Grant in Dementia Care. So that's about exploring the real-world adoption of strategies that aim to improve the quality of care that people living with dementia receive. We've increased it from 200,000 to 460,000 this year, and that's really been through the motivation of the donors who, which is the Bartle Pathway to Care. They're really keen to see some action in this area, which is fantastic. So the project should focus on moving evidence along that pathway to practice. So it's about, real-world evaluation of interventions that have already been piloted, or it could be about adapting interventions that might be in another country, but you'd like to use them in Australia. The translation grant may involve partnerships with industry, implementation science experts, and other stakeholders. So there's up to 10 investigators permitted on this application. And then finally, we have our clinical postgraduate stipends. And so they're designed to support a health professional to undertake a PhD and embark on a career in research. So often we see research ideas come out of practice and observations that you see out there in the real world. So we're hoping that this will, inspire a health professional to actually take that next step and go into a field of research. So the applicant must have a health professional background like OT, medicine, nursing, and so on. And the successful applicant will need to show that they are enrolled in a PhD or before the actual award commences. So funds can be used to backfill the applicant's salary or can be used for research activities and can be undertaken in conjunction with other funding and fellowships. So now just moving on to what we're doing differently this year. So many of you have already been online and registered for our new grants management portal, which is really exciting for us. So hopefully you've been able to get on and register and not experience too many problems so far. The main change with regards to this process to be mindful of is the endorsement or the sign-off phase of your application. So if you've been a previous applicant, you would remember at the end of the application process, you would be busily trying to find signatures of all your investigators and your institution on a PDF form. So this year, what you need to do is it's all done through the portal automatically. So you just send your application off to your associate investigators and your university. They'll receive an email with a link to your application and they can endorse it at a click of a button. But the main thing to make sure is that they do all this before the closing date. You're also able to download PDF versions of the draft application if you want to share that with your AIs as well, or even a blank application if you just wanted to see what all the information that you needed to, so you can see all the information that you need for the application. And all your applications will be listed on under my applications, and it's under the apply page. So if you have any troubles with this new portal, please feel free to get in touch with us. Other things to know, so we value the involvement of people living with dementia and their families and carers in research, as it makes for better projects where the outcomes are more likely to be implemented into practice and directly benefit those who are impacted by dementia. So one change that we've put in this year is we allow 3 associate investigators on our project grants and fellowship applications, but we've also allowed for a 4th space this time around if you want to appoint a person with a living experience to be part of your project team as an investigator. People living with living experience of dementia are also involved in reviewing sections of your application, including the plain English summary, the rationale and implications of the research. And there's also a section on including people impacted by dementia in the project. This is a bit of a change from last year. We've broken that up into 2 sections. So one of it is, there's 2 questions. So one will capture involvement leading up to the application. So that's where you can say that you maybe had a research buddy that you discussed the idea with, or you got a person with living experience to review the application. And then the second part of the question is what planned involvement you'll have for the project going forward. So are they on a steering committee or that sort of thing? This review contributes to 20% of your overall score, so it's important that the sections are written clearly and concisely. And if you would like to work with a dementia advocate through Dementia Australia, there's a link there. Please reach out to the team and we'll match up you with some people with living experience to help you with your project and the grant application. Also too, we know that dementia research is a small but growing field, but it's important that we manage conflicts of interest appropriately and that the review is free of bias, and to ensure that we provide the best, possible review of our applications. We ask that the research proposal and other sections of the application are de-identified, so you don't include your name or university on the application. And there's some tips in the information for applicants booklet on how to do this. There are places in the application where you can identify collaborators and institutions, and fellowship applicants can still talk about their team, their previous work secondments and career progression sections. So rest assured that although the methodology is reviewed separately in the first instance, everything comes together with your track record as your application proceeds through the review process. If you are successful, we can discuss particular requirements that you need for your while we're preparing the agreement. So if you've got a particular start date, as long as it's not too far off into 2026, or if there's some part-time fellowships can be considered under special circumstances. And we also provide feedback on your application. So hopefully this will help you in the future. But if you haven't received any feedback from a previous year, just let us know. We might be able to get that for you. So that's it from me. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking so forward to see lots of new and interesting applications this year. If you do have any inquiries, please reach out to us at the Foundation. We're more than happy to get in touch with you.
Super. Thanks, Annette, for that overview. We'll move on, and our next speaker is Dr. Jane Thompson, who is a past member of the DARF Scientific Panel and a current Lived Experience Expert Advisory Panel member.
So thank you, and thanks for that introduction. It's a nice segue into what I'm going to talk about. So what I'm aiming to do in my presentation is to just briefly talk about the language of public involvement in research. And I strongly believe that terminology really matters. And I know that this is an evolving space, and also researchers often struggle with the language to use, and reviewers actually find the loose or inappropriate use of terms quite frustrating. I'd also like to give you some ideas about how to meaningfully and respectfully involve people impacted by dementia in research, and also give you some thoughts about what I would expect as a dementia advocate reviewer in your grant application to DARF. And I'm going to do this in the form of tips that might help you with your application. So my first one is about terminology. So researchers may interact with members of the public in a variety of ways, and this is just generally categorized into what we call engagement, participation, and involvement. And engagement in research includes researchers raising awareness of research, sharing knowledge, or engaging or creating a dialogue with the public. Participation, I think, is quite clear. That means being a research study participant. And involvement is about people with relevant experience partnering with researchers and contributing to how that research is designed, conducted, and disseminated. And the research is carried out with or by people with that direct or indirect experience of a disease or health condition rather than to, about, or for them. And the point I want to make here is that you shouldn't use these terms loosely or interchangeably, and I can assure you that a lot of people do. And they do have quite specific meanings, so be aware of this when you're preparing your application. But obviously what we're talking about here today is involvement, and this should be quite straightforward. It shouldn't be a problem, and all of these definitions align with the terms used in the UK, who are the leaders in public involvement in research. And in Australia, we've generally adopted these terms. But having said that, the terms do vary across countries, so you need to be aware of that if you start looking at the literature around public involvement. And now there are many terms used to describe involvement in research, and I've listed some of these here, both in terms of how we are described, and I'll get to this later, but also around what we actually do. So just to confuse you, if you read any of the Canadian literature, when Canadians say engagement, they mean what we call involvement. So just beware. And within Alzheimer's Australia, as it was previously known, now Dementia Australia, the terms used have also evolved. So mainly around the who rather than the what. But what used to be called consumer involvement when I first became involved, became involvement of people living with dementia carers and families. Then it became involvement of people impacted by dementia, which I thought worked well. And now a different term is being introduced, and that is involvement in people with living experience. Or is it lived experience? I'll get to that. So that's the terminology around what we do. But when it comes to the terms used to describe who we are and what our role is, well, that's when things get a bit more complex. And people have quite strong preferences around the terms used. And I know that researchers say that they have difficulty knowing what terms to use, and they also don't want to use terms that might offend people. So you can see there's quite a long list of terms used to describe us, and I won't go through them all. And there's also a variety of terms used to describe our role when we actually get involved in research. Suffice it to say that the term consumer is not used by Dementia Australia anymore, although it's still used by, say, the NHMRC. And I would advise against using it in your application. Frankly, most people don't like it, and including dementia advocate reviewers. Referring to people as having lived experience, which to me just means personal experience, is quite common. But there's now a new term creeping in, which I struggle a bit with, namely people with living experience. Dementia Australia says this covers people living with dementia, their families and carers, and that the intentional and deliberate use of the current tense, so living versus lived, focuses your attention on the person in front of you. But in the information for applicants, they refer to people with a living or lived experience of dementia. So are these two things different, or are they one and the same? I'm not sure. Anyway, the important thing is that you need to acknowledge and value our expertise, which is derived from our personal experience of dementia. I'd advise that you ask people what their preferences are in relation to how they prefer to be labelled, and be clear who you mean and use that term consistently. Okay, so moving on to how we can actually meaningfully involve people in our research. So you need to demonstrate that you already have and you're going to continue to involve people impacted by dementia as contributors to or partners in your research, and that you value their contribution. You need to say who will be involved and how they'll be involved. Now, I really like these principles which were developed by the NHS in the UK. And the first one is that you need to involve the right people. So involve those people who are the most relevant and appropriate to your study. This may mean people with a diagnosis of dementia. It might be people with mild cognitive impairment, or it may be people at risk, or carers or care partners, or people who describe themselves as advocates. And note that you generally need to include both a person with dementia and a carer, and you may be questioned, for instance, if you only involve a carer in your application. In some cases, the right people to involve might be members of the general public, for example, if you're doing risk reduction research or population-based studies. So how do you find the right people? Well, you might know someone impacted by dementia who has previous experience in involvement, or someone you've worked with who might be able to refer you on to others. You could seek examples from other researchers as to how they've approached this, or ask them to connect you with relevant people. As Annette said, Dementia Australia can connect you with relevant people through their Dementia Advocates program. And don't forget that the Sydney Dementia Network has our own lived experience expert advisory panel. And it's a good idea to present your idea to the panel, and maybe some members will be interested in involvement in your project. And then you need to say how you will select people to be involved. So are you going to advertise, seek expressions of interest? And how will you decide if your applicants are a good fit? And it's important to document this in your application. And you also need to think about accessibility, diversity, and inclusion issues. Consider how you try to involve people who reflect the diversity of backgrounds and experiences that you expect your potential research participants or the people who are likely to benefit from your research to have. Also, how will you work with people in a way that is inclusive as possible? So if you're involving people with cognitive difficulties, how are you going to support them to be involved? And then the second principle is you need to involve enough people. So enough people should be involved to provide reasonable breadth and depth of views on the issues that are likely to be important to the people the study will aim to recruit or who it's intended to benefit. The right number of people depends on the scope of your study, but it should always be more than one person. One person is unlikely to be able to represent the needs and perspectives of an entire group of people, and it may be unfair to ask one person to take on that responsibility. You may want someone as a lead person who might be listed as an associate investigator on the grant application, and you may also want to have a small advisory group of people with relevant experience. Now, not everyone involved in the study has to be involved in the same way. There's a range of possibilities with different people involved with different tasks, or some people maybe being members of the project team. And when you're deciding on how many people to involve in your research, think about how many people you can actually manage to be involved well. And it has to be practical and feasible because it does take time. And it may be helpful to have a nominated contact person on the research team with whom people can keep in touch. And the third principle, involve those people enough. So different for different types of research, of course, and no one size fits all. But the relevant people should be involved in as many aspects of the study as is feasible, productive and appropriate to that research and at the right time. Ideally, you would involve people at the earliest stage possible, so even before the research begins, in deciding on the research topic or in priority setting or in preparing the grant proposal itself. Then, of course, involvement throughout the research and after the research ends, so in dissemination or implementation activities. And I won't go into what you might do at what the people you involve might do at each stage of the research, because there are plenty of resources that you can look up about this. But it's important that you document this in your application. So in summary, don't make vague statements, and I've seen these. We will establish an advisory group, or people impacted by dementia will be involved in all stages of this project, full stop. Well, as a reviewer, I would expect you to outline who will be involved, how you'll find them, how many will be involved, and be clear about what their roles might be. And there's a fourth principle too, which isn't often done, but that is to think about documenting what you do and what difference it's made to your research. This could be very useful to other researchers if published. Now, involving people impacted by dementia is just as important for those researchers who work in the laboratory, who may not have direct contact with people with dementia, carers and families, or be involved in the direct delivery of healthcare. And the same principles apply to who you might involve. And the ways of involving people might be a little bit different, but still important. There are examples, for instance, of buddy pairs, forming advisory groups for projects or programs of research, involving people in research priority setting exercises, so generating questions that patients and families want basic science research to address. And researchers who involve people in their biomedical research studies, they say that public involvement brings focus and context to their research. It provides good lay communication skill practice. It opens up public engagement channels, and it emphasises the reasons why they're doing their research in the first place. And it can also help attract funding if the research is seen to be valued by the people who will benefit from the research. Now, some researchers might assume that people may be put off by engaging with or getting involved in basic science research, but this is generally not true, with members of the public keen to engage with research at this basic fundamental level. And my third tip is you do need to budget for involvement. You need to include a budget to cover any costs associated with involvement, and even better, be able to provide at least some remuneration for involvement. And there is guidance available about this. And you do need to check university policy and processes for paying honorariums to so-called volunteers, because these can sometimes be complex and take up a lot of time too. Now, this one is really, really important in my view, and this is about how you write the lay summary and the sections to be reviewed by dementia advocate reviewers. They need to be clear and easy to understand. And I always say, don't lose me at this stage when I'm reading the lay summary, because this is often the first thing that dementia advocates or advocate reviewers will read. The plain language sections are all really important, so spend some time on this and get advice from people that you're involving. The plain language summary is not the abstract, so just don't plonk your abstract into that plain language section. It's a completely different art to write a plain language summary, which is understandable. And also beware of abbreviations and acronyms, and also the use of overly technical terms without providing any explanation. And I put this slide up with a slight tongue-in-cheek, but I quite like I quite like preparing this slide, let's say. Beware of the co-words. There are a plethora of co-words which are currently used to describe the methods by which researchers partner with people who will be impacted by their research, and some of them I've listed here. And this has led to a conflation of meanings and practices, and has even led to researchers coining a new term, co-ubiquity, to describe this phenomenon. There are a range of current definitions, especially for the widely used terms co-design and co-production. Now, I would recommend if you're going to use these terms, you explain what you mean by the term and what that means in practice in your research. So don't just say, we will co-design with people impacted by dementia, or we will use co-design principles. You need to explain what you mean. And don't use the term if it isn't really applicable. Not all involvement is co-design, and nor does it have to be. And not all that is called co-design is actually co-design. And my sixth and last tip is about accessing and following the guidance available. Now, we produced a guide for researchers a few years ago, which is available on the Dementia Australia website. You should also be familiar with Dementia Australia's dementia language guidelines. It's very important to follow these, otherwise it definitely raises red flags for dementia advocate reviewers. And I've also included a link to some guidance from Parkinson's UK, which I think is very helpful for lab-based researchers. And I also included a paper on the earlier slide I showed you. And finally, these grants are very competitive. All those who make the first cut and will be reviewed by dementia advocates are potentially fundable, and you need to make yours stand out from the rest. A good consideration of how you involve people impacted by dementia could just make the difference. Dementia advocate reviews may just get yours over the line. So to summarise, my top tips to follow when completing your application that will make dementia advocates look favourably upon it is think about terminology. Don't confuse these terms, engagement, participation and involvement, and also check with us about our preferred descriptors. Follow the principles for meaningful public involvement in research. You need to budget for involvement. You need to write a good plain language summary. Beware of all those co-words and access and follow the available guidance. At the end of the day, you need to show that you respect and value the contributions that we make to research, and that's a direct quote from one of our dementia advocates. Thank you very much, and good luck with your application.
Thank you, Jane. That was fantastically helpful. And moving on, we are going to hear from Professor Olivier Piguet, who is the Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology and an NHMRC Leadership Fellow at the School of Psychology and the Brain and Mind Centre at the University of Sydney. And he's speaking to you as a previous DARF scientific panel reviewer.
Thanks, Penny, and well, welcome everyone. As Penny was saying, I've been sitting on the DARF panel. I sat on the DARF panel for 7 years. What I'm going to share with you is not just what I've gleaned from this panel, but also from sitting on other panels, NHMRC, ARC, funding bodies in Europe, and essentially it comes back to a couple of points that they all come down to the same thing. So I'll give you 4 pieces of advice or 4 suggestions that I'm hoping will be useful for you. And some of this might sound really trivial and basic, but you'd be surprised how many times these issues come back again and again and again. And the first one is, read the instruction. As Annette has described, there are a number of schemes available this year and every year within Dementia Australia and the DARF research panel, research funding panel. But you need to make sure that you're targeting the right thing for you. And so reading the instructions is important. There's no point in you wasting your time applying for something that is not suited for what you're doing because of the wrong stage of your career, or that the scope of your project is not right. So yeah, is the scope of your project right for the scheme? Is this the right time? Am I the right person? Now, once you've read the instructions and you start preparing your applications, make sure that you cover, I mean, here I'm listing the sections that are needed within the DARF scheme for these grants, but whatever grant applications that you're going to prepare, make sure that you cover all the sections that are required, because you'll be ranked and rated across these sections. So what you want to do is to make sure that you cover all these sections, and also make sure that you do that in a way that is easy to follow, so that as a reviewer, I can find these sections easily. And if you make my life easy, it'll be easier for me to rate your application well, because it also demonstrates that it's done in a clear way. The next point, again, which is basic, but often people don't or tend to forget, is you need to start early. So the scheme is open, and I'm really hoping that you're already working on your application right now. You need time to gather your thoughts and make sure that, again, your proposal is the right one. I know we all press for time, we all have many different demands on our times and deadlines and so on. But again, as was mentioned before, there are a lot of applicants, and success rate is about 10%, 15%. So it means that for every 10 applications, only one or two will be funded. So if you want to be one of these two, make sure you start early. You need simmering time. So you need to draft your application and then put it aside. Take time, do something else, come back to it and reread it. And you'll be surprised how often what you thought was clear, crystal clear, writing doesn't come across as clear anymore. And in particular, what you want to do is to make sure that you've covered these core principles. You know, what is the issue, what it is that you want to investigate, what is the gap in the science, and why is it important, and why now? So there's a need to demonstrate clearly why you should be given some money to investigate your what question. You know, you can have a lot of what questions, but some are more important than others. And so certainly in terms of the timing of the questions, also there's something to be considered. Another point that needs to come across clearly is how you're going to address this question. So you have your what, you have your why, but how you're going to do that. And you want to be able to demonstrate that you can do that in a way that is feasible, achievable, within the scope of the funding that is available, and within the time frame that you are meant to complete your work. And finally, the last thing you want to demonstrate or to convey to the reviewers is that you are the right person to do that. So make sure that you provide enough information so that we as a reviewer can rate you as highly as possible and be convinced that, yes, we have the right candidate to address that question. And that's indeed an important question. The next point is about your audience, so us as reviewers. And as James mentioned before, so it's not just experts in the field. You also have people with lived or living experience that will review your applications. So you need to be mindful of that. And Jane has covered these 6 principles very eloquently, and that are important and play a central role to the application. Don't pretend that you can cure dementia in your project. You won't, and we know that you won't be able to. People have been working on dementia for decades, and we're making progress, but it's a slow process. So don't pretend that you are going to do more than what you can do. Now, also think about where your grant is going. So your grant is going to Dementia Australia. So we don't need to know about what dementia is. Don't spend half a page to tell us that dementia is a neurodegenerative brain disorder that affects 400,000 people in Australia, etc., etc. We already know that. And save you space to outline exactly what the critical issues are for your project. Use appropriate language. Jane has covered that. And again, keep that in mind. And certainly coming back to this last point is that the panel will see through tokenistic involvement of external party and and use of weird acronym like PWLE and so on. So you need to be mindful about how you want to involve people with living experience or lived experience. And as Jane again described, how you want to do that and the meaningful engagement of external public. The next one is about the budget. And I think you need to be realistic in your budget. There's a limited amount of money that you have available for the different schemes. And you need to be able to outline exactly how you're going to spend that money. But again, provide enough information so we know how you are going to spend this money. Don't pad it, because we are experts. We've been reviewing grants for a number of years, most of us, and so we know when there's an attempt to max out the money that is available, so requesting for basic, photocopying paper and that sort of stuff. If you don't need all the money, you don't need all the money, and that's fine. Now, if you have a bigger project, it's okay to include other sources of funding. And for me, it's also a good way to demonstrate that you've thought about your project really carefully and that you know that it might require a bit more than what you're asking for within this scheme. And that if you can demonstrate that, hey, I know that it's going to cost more than $75,000, but I've managed to secure the funding that is necessary to achieve my goals. For me, it's a big tick. Again, start early. I think you need time to think about your grant, what you want to do. As Jane has mentioned already, clarity is key. Acronyms, make sure, think about that carefully. Is the acronym or are the acronyms that you want to use really necessary? My tip is that if you use an acronym less than 6, 7 times, 8 times, just spell it out each time. It makes our life so much easier. Be kind to the reviewer. Again, clarity of writing. The next one, external feedback, and it's come back to the simmering aspect. Just ask someone else also to read your application and see if they understand, particularly if they don't work directly in the same area. If it's clear to them, you can be sure, or you can be reassured that it'll be also clear to the panel. And remember the 2-step process. So the panel will shortlist about 50% of the applications before the shortlisted application will be going to full review. So you want to make sure that your application stands out and that will go through the full process and be the successful one at the end. So good luck to you all, and I hope you are successful in this round.
Thanks, Olivier. And moving on, we're going to hear from Dr. Brandon Munn, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Shine Lab, School of Medical Sciences at the University of Sydney, and he's speaking to you as a project grant recipient.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Brandon Munn. I'm at the Sydney University. I'm just going to share my screen here. Beautiful. Cool. Yeah, so I'm at the Sydney University in the Shine Lab, and it feels quite embarrassing and funny being on this side of the sort of advice panel. So this is actually my first sort of funding. So, you know, take all my advice with a grain of salt. I've tried to sort of be, you know, I've tried to sort of outline here the three main tips that I've found that I think have really helped, like after the multiple years of applying for funding. These are sort of the 3 tips that have really helped, I think, sort of in the past few years, figure out applications. So yeah, so I'm gonna just the key thing to think about when I write a grant is, you know, good writing will not save bad ideas, but bad writing can kill good ideas and good science. So here I'm going to give 3 tips, and then sort of they're working in reverse order of, you know, what I think is important. Starting with preparation prevents poor performance. So as we've heard already so many times, I'm sure we're going to keep hearing, peruse the guidelines, you know, read the general instructions really carefully, know exactly what you need to do, and follow the rules exactly. As we're sort of seeing before, you know, check if the grant has any, you know, sort of magic words, special words, keywords that keep popping up in the guidelines or in the websites, and then sort of use them and make sure you address them. You know, state this like really clearly in your application. You know, I mean, they're really seeing a lot of trends of words and you know, what we need to be addressing in the grant. You know, like looking for trying to involve people. And you know, just make sure you address those sort of key factors. That's a big sort of step, and sort of as you're being reviewed, as they're going along, they want to tick those boxes. Ponder your topic. So this is before you start, you know, have a think about, is this the right project at all? You know, is this the right, you don't want to be trying to force or, you know, constrain your research to fit a research, you know, or a calling that it's not really aligned with. So either in that case, like maybe look somewhere else and look if there's a better call for your idea, or if you're really interested in Dementia Australia, like adapt your idea and make sure it like targets it can target it in a meaningful way to really match and sort of support the goals of Dementia Australia. And then once you can figure out this match of your topic to the calling, you know, make that really crystal clear in your application. So do you have I ask myself, like, do I have a clear and concise hypothesis that I want to test? And do I believe and can I define specific experiments that will address this hypothesis clearly? And then that sort of leads to my next final point, which is pilot data. I know the project grant is to fund pilot data, but I mean, what would Maverick be without Goose? So even a little bit of pilot data can really help, you know, make your ideas look feasible. And that I find like a little bit of stats can sort of really help, you know, your application go a long way to sort of show that it is worthwhile funding, you know, even looking into any pilot data or looking into this further. Next, revise ruthlessly and get help doing it. So you want to really polish application extensively. You know, don't fall in love with the first idea or first version. You know, time to this is starting early, because I'll give you time to, you know, repeat and agonize over definitely agonize over your editing, because you want to make the application really crystal clear, really focused, accurate to what you want to be doing. And sort of, I think there's like a fine line between, I find the applications are ready when, you know, it reads really smoothly and joyfully, and which will help it make it stand out. But also at that stage when you know it's ready, you've agonized over it enough. So a big one to that is I spend a lot of time on my first page, you know, probably over 80 to 85% of the time. You know, that's the movie trailer of the application. So it's really important to I find to work on that first page. Yep, so bad writing kills good science. So as Olivia was saying before, Olivia, what's the big question? Why now? Why me? Why this approach? So you want to state the hypothesis you're going to test, give the long-term objectives, state the specific aims, reference how your proposal aligns with the goals and the outlines of Dementia Australia, describe clearly the research design and methods, and then say, importantly, the why now, why me, why this approach, state why the proposal is unique, important, and worth supporting and worth getting funding for. And the most important one I found is nobody really knows what they're doing at first. We're all trained scientists, not trained salesmen or pitching the idea like marketers. So it's really important to ask someone for help who's a very successful grants person, but will give you tough love, and most importantly, someone that's happy to read and reread your grant. You don't want someone who's a great grant person, but will just return some superficial comments and say great work or fantastic. You want someone who's happy to keep reading, and obviously have done well, particularly if you get someone who's done well in the Dementia Australia already. And I think the most important thing you can find from someone is obviously just the framing of the project, but also points that they struggle with, anything that they're going to struggle with when they're happy to reread it is something that a reviewer's going to have a problem with understanding, and they're not going to read that. So look for some help. And finally, the most important point, I think, is you've got to believe in your project. And I think that's sort of, don't choose a topic just because you think it will be funded. I think it's easy, especially when you're a bit young, to sort of be looking for a project that you think will work. But after some experience, I think if you don't believe in your project, how do you expect anyone else to believe in your project? And you're going to just run out of energy or the effort required to make a high level successful application. You're just not going to have that sort of ability to work hard, to keep iterating and refine, and then to write it in a manner that's going to champion the project if you don't believe it in yourself. So I think this is the number one point. The rest are just making sure you do your job and then do it right. But really, I think it's really important to choose a project and find something that you believe in. It makes a big difference for that one. Then you also, to believe in yourself, you've got to make sure you ignore the armchair critics. People will always, there's always going to be some problems with people with different opinions of different science. I guess to be doing sort of novel science, or to be doing something that's something different or worth investing from the norm, because lots of people have been researching dementia, to say you're doing something different or to try a new avenue, that seems justified. Like a lot of these projects were unfundable at one stage. So, if you really believe in it and you think it's going to work, and people don't agree, let's still give it a shot. And the final point is, the conviction is contagious. So we all have so much passion inside of us. We're all scientists. We're all, we've all chosen this, really tough career and this tough funding environment. And because we're passionate about what we're doing, and we all know so much about our little niche. So I think one thing I found was trying to really convey the passion that I have about my projects when I'm in group meetings or talking to colleagues, and try and put that into the writing to come out, and that to sort of speak to the belief and the passion, and if you believe in your writing, it's going to just make it stand out. So final takeaways, start strong. Make sure you read all the guidelines. Make sure you have a really clear plan, a proposal that's going to align with Dementia Australia. And then see if you can test it in some way to really make it strengthen the point. Clarity wins. Keep things short, sharp, and clear. And finally, back yourself, back your project. At least then you'll know you've got one believer in your project. So finally, good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Brandon. That's great. Back your ideas, which is sometimes hard, isn't it, when you've got getting a lot of critical feedback. Next up, we've got Dr. Pradeep Cholan, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Motor Neuron Disease Research Centre at Macquarie University, and he's speaking to you as a previous Dementia Australia postdoctoral fellow recipient.
Thank you, Penny. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pradeep. I'm from the Motor Neuron Disease Research Center at Macquarie University, and I was awarded the Race Against Dementia and the Dementia Australia Research Foundation Fellowship in 2024. I thought I'll start off this presentation talking a bit about myself because I did my PhD in a cardiovascular research, and I've moved on now to dementia research. So just a bit about myself. I finished my PhD in 2019 at the Heart Research Institute and University of Sydney, and on the topics of vasculature and atherosclerosis. My first postdoc was at Centenary Institute from 2019 to 2021, where I looked more into gut microbiome and the vasculature. And finally, now I'm at my second postdoc ongoing at Macquarie University. And here I've shifted the focus to a gut-brain axis and neurodegeneration. As you would see that I've done various things in my PhD to my first postdoc to my second. So I want to talk about skill transfer in this because in a fellowship application, it is, yes, you want to advertise a project, but you also want to advertise yourself. So there's a lot of skill transfers which you want to think about. For instance, in my PhD, I gained experience in designing cardiovascular atherosclerosis mouse modeling in heart diseases. But in my first postdoc, I took the atherosclerosis background, but I started designing them in zebrafish disease models. And in my second postdoc, I took the zebrafish disease modeling and I transferred them into studying neurodegeneration and with the gut-brain axis. So there is a bit of skill transfer from my PhD to the first postdoc to the second postdoc. And I think this is something which, if you are considering writing your fellowship application, you need to consider what all have I learned and how can I use these skills to advertise myself as the best person for this project. So I would like to start off with some tips when you guys are writing your fellowship. I think you need to write around 7 pages of your proposal, which includes 1 page of reference and 1 page will include your budget and your timeline. The rest 5 pages are you explaining your project. And I usually start off my first page with an executive summary, which is basically the almost like an abstract, but it is almost like an advertisement for yourself. So in the executive summary, I like to have these points, mainly what is the problem? Go straight to the problem. The second one would be how can we actually address the problem? And this, the third section, which is one of the important things which I consider, is why am I the best person to address this problem? Because in a fellowship, you always want to advertise yourself. And then I talk about the overarching hypothesis and aims, and finally, a big picture outcome. Now, you would also seen that in my executive summary, I also had a schematic representation of my project. It is a very simple image, but if the reviewer was to follow this diagram whilst reading my grant, they should be able to follow it clearly. There's very less words being used. I just have a few words for each aim, stating what the main outcome is going to be, and I even included outcomes and future direction in like how if this project was successful, what will happen in the future. Next, one of the other important things which I thought was helpful was be strategic on what you want to showcase as your preliminary data. I know we have the tendency to data dump in our fellowship saying that, oh, look what all we have done, but that might dilute some of the important experiments which you actually want to showcase. Let's take my project, for instance. So I have a unique skill where I'm able to perform fecal microbiome transplants from mouse into zebrafish and look at gut inflammation, brain inflammation, behavioral phenotypes in fish. So that's few things which are very unique to my project, and that I know that those unique things will make my project stand out. And those are the 3 results which are included in the projects. Even though I had more results, these were the ones which I focused on, so that I almost like make sure that the reviewer knows that I'm capable of doing these experiments and I have the equipments and everything logistics in place. In terms of your budget, I think give a breakdown on your budget with explanation, provide a provide a timeline for your project. And I think you guys have a you have a page for this to do so. Especially when you're working with mouse models in any of your aims, make sure you tell them what's the cost per mouse, how many cages are required, what's the length of your treatment. Make sure you give them the details, and those details actually tell the reviewers that you have thought about your project in a very logistical way and not in a superficial way. I also, in my project, had the involvement of dementia advocates and had a dementia advocate remuneration fee. And I also actually budgeted for publications costs, and I was able to tell them when my publications would come, what my aims were. Some of the other advices I thought was useful was be mindful of how many aims you're proposing for a 3 to 5 year fellowship. Um, as researchers, we tend to be um, trying to cram lot more aims in a constrained amount of time, but the reviewers will see that we haven't thought about it in a very logistical way, and that might pull you down in your scoring. Try to design independent aims. I know it is quite hard sometimes to design independent aims, but uh, try to when you can. For instance, for me, my aim one and aim two can run in parallel, but my aim three is kind of dependent upon aim two. The other one I would say is state your risk in your proposal and also state how you're going to mitigate them in your proposal. And I think this might add some brownie points to you because it shows how you have thought about your project in a holistic way. I think this one is a very important thing. Ask a non-scientist to read your lay summary, and it might be your friends, your family, whoever it might be, because what we think as lay summary might not be. We as scientists are more used to jargon words, which the general public might not get it. So I found this to be very useful. I gave it to a few of my friends to read, and a few of them picked up a few jargon words, which they were like, I don't understand it, and which means that you need to make sure you explain your lay summary much better. And another thing is like, do not write generic statements when you're talking about how you want to involve people with lived experience or living experience with dementia, the carers, or the general public. Um, uh, I think as basic scientists, you want to put more thought into this last statement and actually think about how you will actually involve the, people with lived or living experience and the public in your project. And a general statement will actually pull you down. Once you've written your grant, the grant refinement is the next step. I had actually applied for dementia fellowship in 2022, and I was rejected. But the DARF is one of the few um, grant schemes where they actually provide you with feedback, and that was very, very helpful for me. So I tried to incorporate as much as feedback as possible, which I got from the previous years, and then I wrote my proposal. And as usual, like it went back and forth between myself and my supervisor with all the edits. But because your supervisor and you are too close to the project, we failed to see some of the major loopholes in the project. So at least at Macquarie, we had an internal review where we used to share our applications with other senior scientists, and this actually proved to be very useful for me because one of our other senior scientists, she was able to pull out a major loophole, and we then brainstorm and we were able to modify our proposal so that that loophole didn't exist anymore. And I think that is a very, very important thing, to give your proposal to someone other than your supervisor so that they can see it in a different light. In terms of the lay summary and how you want to involve people with living experience, carers, and the public involvement, you can approach LEAP or the Dementia Advocate Program, and make sure you tighten those sections in your proposal. I mean, in your fellowship application. So I think SUNY Dementia Network also has a lived experience experts advisory panel. So this is similar to the Dementia Advocate Program, where you want to actually write a project summary in lay terms. You want to contact the LEAP or the Dementia Advocate Program and arrange to present your proposal. Then then they will assign you dementia advocates with whom you can discuss how you can actually improve your proposal, and make sure that you incorporate their feedback, and also make sure you mention that you have incorporated their feedback in your proposal, and that actually shows the reviewers that you're actively engaging with the dementia advocates. The one thing which you need to be be ready with is the question is, how will you be able to involve the dementia advocates in your project? Be ready with this answer and approach LEAP or dementia advocate panel. So the next step is you got selected for the interview. So what's next? I attended a 30-minute panel interview, and in the 30-minute panel interview, I had to give a 10-minute TED Talk style presentation, because it needs to show how passionate you are, of your project, and you need to be conveying what you are doing in your project in a very layman terms. And I'm happy for you guys to contact me at this stage so that I can give you some tips and tricks which I followed whilst giving this interview. And yep, persistence is the key. Be consistent and passionate about your work. In 2020, up until 2023, since 2019, I had applied for 11 grants as principal investigator, and this was my one successful grant. Feedback is very rare, but when you get it, make sure you apply the feedback into your successive proposals. So start early so you can incorporate feedback given to you by senior scientists, and also you can incorporate the feedback given to you by the dementia advocate panels. And all the best. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pradeep. And finally, our last speaker today is Dr. Pratisha Chatterjee. She's a Senior Research Fellow, Royce Simmons Foundation Mid-Career Research Fellow, Centre of Research Excellent in Enhanced Dementia Diagnosis, the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. And she's speaking to us as a previous mid-career fellowship recipient.
Penelope, I'll just put up my slides. Okay. So I've been asked to talk about my approach to a successful Dementia Australia mid-career fellowship application. And so I'll give you some of my strategies. Somehow my slides are not moving forward. Oh, there. Okay. So I think like everyone else, I'm just gonna second whatever strategies and tips that everyone has given previously. They're pretty much what I'm going to tell you about, but I'll give you a little bit more details about how I went about my application. So I did engage with people with a lived or living experience of dementia. I pitched my project to them and involved them as members of my project's steering committee. And I had also told them that even if I don't get this grant, I'm going to ask them for their feedback for my future grant applications. So, I think it was really useful because their insights really, firstly, it helped me understand the disease better. You build that emotional connection as well. I think it also helped me shape my questions better because you understand what really matters. For instance, one of the dementia advocates, she told me that I want to know how soon am I going to, get worse, or what is my timeline, and that kind of tells you, okay, prognostic. Prognosis is something that we need to look into. So I think involving, people with a lived experience of dementia really helped me, at least. And it did strengthen several sections of my application as well. So Also start your application early, because that gives you time to carefully plan. Like Olivier said, you can simmer over your ideas, maybe while brushing your teeth one day, and while doing different things. But you can constantly think about it, but you need that time, right? And of course, getting feedback from your mentors, I think that is the most valuable. So you have to give them time, because only then can you get meaningful feedback, which I got. So that was a big thing, I think, in my application. And also to coordinate your team, right? So you need time for that. To get signatures in order. So for all of that, I think it's really good to start your application early. And like everyone has again, emphasized, and I've also heard this in the several grant information sessions that I had attended in my previous years when I was applying for these DARF fellowships. That is, use the keywords, read the guidelines, use the language from there. I guess it really helps. It also saves the reviewers, because they'll saves time for the reviewers, because they are looking for those keywords as well. So in that way, I think it gives them, it makes it just easier for them to find those points. Now with a mid-career fellowship, I think what the reviewers are looking for is to see that enthusiasm in you, to basically become an independent researcher. So they want to see someone who is very keen and motivated to establish their own independent team. And so basically collect data for an NHMRC investigator grant or a CIA ideas grant. So you have to show that you want that leadership sort of a position. You want to have your own team. So the kind of points that I had addressed in my career progression statement, I think this is quite an important. It's just, I think, 300 words, but I think it really highlights a lot of things that the reviewers are looking for in a fellowship application. So I addressed what are my relevant expertise, and how my track record could help this project. How will my project extend or deepen my expertise? So what other expertise will I gain if I can conduct this project? And then how my mentors or my collaborators will support my success. What resources, infrastructure, or data will I have access to through my mentors, my host institution, my collaborators? And what are the opportunities for training, collaboration, or skill building through my project? So, and of course, how I will establish my own team, or how I want to become an independent researcher. So this part of the fellowship application I thought was quite important. The next part is the career summary, and you just have 2 pages. Now, most of us, I think, have CVs which are quite a few pages long. So 2 pages is a bit hard, but I think it's important to put in these points, like the career impact statement. So I had about 2 paragraphs here where I mentioned about what my major findings were, and how they've been used by other researchers, organizations, or international working groups. So I think this is quite important to show that your research, that you've conducted previously, has impact. Then again, when it comes to scientific publications, now we have a lot of scientific publications, and you cannot possibly list all of them in 2 pages when you have to put in so much more information. So maybe, so what I did was I mentioned my total number of publications, and then how many first author publications I had, my citations, my average first author field weighted citation index. And I would only do that if my field weighted citation index is above 1, ideally above 2. But I mean, this is something that you highlight if you think it's going to be a bit of a boast, for your career summary. Then I listed my top 5 publications, the citations, like different sort of indices that you could use to highlight how they've had impact. I also added a short description for the top 5 publications and described my role in them. I thought that was important to highlight what I have contributed to and how I've contributed to these publications. If it's possible, maybe use your first author or last author publications in these top 5. Then for scientific presentations, we've generally had a lot of scientific presentations. So you could list your total scientific presentations, maybe the invited ones, and then maybe in the last 3 years, you can list them out in a little bit more detail, perhaps. For grants, so I didn't have many big grants. I had small grants at the university level, but they were impactful still. So what I did was I showed my output from my small grants, and I think that may have helped as well. I did list my awards. I listed my service to the academic community. So I had done a lot of peer reviewing for our scientific articles as well as for grants. So I had listed all of those out, and then list out if you were a conference organizing committee member, a university level committee member. It just shows that you've had some leadership as well, and outreach as well. So if you've interacted with the media about your research, or you've given public lectures, or you've engaged with Dementia Australia advocates, or dementia advocates in general. So I think these are some points that you can highlight in your career summary. Now, coming onto the project, so I think the first section of the project proposal is the aims section. And what I did was I did focus a fair bit on the significance of the project. The main thing, so these are all the points that I focused on, as in what is the current state of the field and what the gaps are, and what is the biological or clinical or societal significance of the problem, what is the research vision that's driving the project, and what are the specific knowledge gaps that will be filled by this project, what methods or approaches I will use, and how are they different, and why are they appropriate, and how my research would lead to new knowledge, what are the expected outcomes, how will it advance the field. But what was most important, I think, was that to show how does this project fit within my broader research program and my long-term goals. Because in a fellowship, I think you have to show that how are you looking at setting up your long-term research goals, and how is this fellowship going to help you in that journey. So in the aims, of course, I also listed my hypotheses as well as the aims and objectives. I made sure that my aims stand alone, so that if one fails, I don't have to, I can still continue with the second aim. And I did make figures and schematics for my objectives wherever possible, just so that it was easier for the reviewer to be able to see them and understand them more clearly. Now, in the background, like everyone knows, you generally put in the current literature, the gap in the knowledge. I did add preliminary data, and also mentioned, the novel technology I was using. And again, I drew a schematic because this was a new technology, and I thought it would just make it easier for the reviewer to understand the new technology that I was talking about. And then at the end, I did summarize in a text box what the unmet need was and how my project was going to address it. And finally, with the research methodology, so mine, I do clinical research. With the participants, I did mention how many participants and how were they diagnosed. Was it based on a clinical diagnosis or a biological diagnosis? Given that, in dementia now, things have changed a little bit. What cohorts I would use, what associated data available, who am I going to access these cohorts from? So all of these different things, just so that the reviewer is quite clear about how feasible is the project that you're talking about going to be. Then with the study design, I again referred back to my schematics that I had shown in page 1. So it was just easier to explain the study design in that way. With the outcome measures of the project, I also wrote about the significance of each of these outcome measures, just so that, it again emphasizes how important the project is and what am I actually going to get out of this project. I did write a lot about the statistical analysis plan as well as the power analysis. I did use a novel technology, so I, that was a positive that I could talk about. And of course, the safety and risk considerations were also mentioned. While I don't have a slide on the budget and the timeline, I did have a Gantt chart for the timeline and the budget. I did break it down and explain how I'm going to use the money. And at the end, I just want to say to everyone, like Pradeep also mentioned, I also tried for a lot of fellowships and grants, and it's not always a smooth journey. So, I've had my fair share of failures as well. And I just want everyone to know that, don't lose hope. And persistence is key, I think. So just stay motivated and keep trying. So with that, I will end my presentation. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the speakers. I will ask now for all the speakers to turn on your video for the Q&A session, please. So we have a few questions in the Q&A, and we also have a few questions that were sent in through the registration. So the first one is for all the researchers. What do you think set your application apart from others and helped your success in securing your grant?
I make a first. So I think for me, because I had written this proposal in various different ways previously for other grants, but when it came to writing for the DARF, I was able to incorporate the feedback which was given to me, and in that way, I think I was able to modify the critical needs. And the other thing was I was able to explain my project, my entire project, to a non-scientist, and they were able to follow it through easily, and they were able to see the impact of the project. And when you convince a layperson to see the impact of the project, a reviewer who's from a science background, they might understand it even better. So I think previous projects, when I explain to my friends, they'll always ask me, "So what?" kind of question. But in this project, I was able to answer the "so what" impact. And that was what I think would have edged my proposal.
Anyone else would like to add on that?
I think my project may have been successful. So this is obviously speculation, but I think one is my track record, perhaps, just because I was able to highlight the impact of my previous research and how while my proposed project was novel, but how I could use my previous expertise in this project. So it kind of helped me, show that I am doing something different, which will make me an independent researcher, but at the same time, I have this expertise that I have used, in another field, or the skills that I have used in another field of dementia research. So perhaps that, yeah.
Thank you. So following up on that, for Olivier, what specific elements or characteristics have made previous mid-career fellowships applications particularly competitive and successful? What would you look more into a mid-career fellowship to classify as successful?
I think that a number of things come to mind. There's certainly a combination of three things. One is your personal track record, as Pratisha was saying. You need to be able to sell yourself, to demonstrate that you have the chops to do the research and that you've had some success previously. And articulating your project, what you want to achieve. And again, coming back to these important questions about, well, why is it important? Why now and why me? And also articulating your project in a way that is clear and that shows that you know your stuff and you can explain your stuff in a way that is understandable by everyone. And which is what Pradeep was saying. You need to be able to, it's the elevator pitch, or you're in the back of the cab and you're going to the airport and the drivers are going, oh, so what do you do? And you go, oh, I'm doing dementia research. And they go, oh, wow, that's interesting. What are you working on at the moment? And so you need to be able to convey that in a way that is clear. So if you have that in your head, then you can write it in a way that is understandable. And the last one is what you're proposing also needs to be in the right environment. So you might have the best idea, you might have the best track record, but if you don't have the infrastructure support, it's going to be a hard sell. So there's the combination of these three things in my mind.
Thank you. I have a few questions to Annette. So first one here in the Q&A is if you are going to apply for a project grant, which is 2 years, and a fellowship, if they need to apply separately.
Yep, that's correct. So do 2 separate applications, and you should be able to have 2 of those running at the same time in the grants portal. So a postdoc won't be automatically considered for a project grant. And the other thing I will say though, don't do a straight cut and paste either. Have a think about what you're doing in a 3-year version of the project as opposed to the 2-year version of the project.
Another question here as well is if you spend 1 year working in a professional technical role, so not research or teaching academia, but it was in science, immediately after your PhD, is this viewed as a 1-year career interruption?
I think this one and the one underneath, it might be better if you reach out to us directly so we can get a better idea of what the work was. But definitely if you're a health professional and you're seeing patients in any way, whether it's, is that an OT or an allied health professional or a medical specialist, that definitely can be used as a career interruption. But we're happy to look at your situation on a case-by-case basis.
You. For Jane now, how do you include people living with dementia in your application when you are doing basic science research?
Yeah, well, look, I think I tried to cover that in my presentation, and I understand that you actually don't get a lot of guidance around this. There's quite a lot of guidance around public involvement in other types of research, but not so much. There is that really nice paper which I presented on one of my slides, which is written by someone, Connor, I think it is. If you can, these slides will be available afterwards, won't they? So, and explained how they involved people that was in ovarian cancer research in their lab-based research. So I think you start by meeting with a group of advocates. You can start by presenting your idea to, say, the Sydney Dementia Network LEAP group, or there'll be other equivalent groups, to get their input about, how much they would value the outcomes of the research that you're planning to do. And build a relationship with people who are interested. I mean, there are lots of people who have an interest in this type of research. It's in your job is to be able to explain it to them in a way which they can understand and actually so that they can see the value of it. But at the end of the day, the money that comes through Dementia Australia Research Foundation is public money, which is donated through people who have a passion and interest to see these problems solved. So I think, in a way you have a responsibility to be able to show that you are going to spend their money wisely. And I think having the input from the people who've been directly impacted by dementia will help you to frame that research in a way which will attract public funds. So have a look at that paper, and also the UK. There's a lot of more stuff coming out of the UK now, because they're really experts in this whole area of public involvement. And the one guidance for Parkinson's disease produced, I think, is quite useful too. But it's important. And it is, I think there was a comment somewhere in the Q&A about whether or not it's compulsory. And I think, Annette, you can confirm this, that yes, it is. It's equally important that you complete those sections of the application for all types of research.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is different things you can do for different types of research. So no one will be disadvantaged, like a biomedical lab-based person won't be disadvantaged because they can't do exactly the same things that a psychosocial type research project can do, but there are things you can do. So yeah, make sure that you do give all projects give those two sections of the application full consideration.
And I think just the other point I'd make too is that a lot of us actually come with scientific backgrounds anyway. So, you know, we're not all people who don't have any experience of science or qualifications in science. So don't assume that dementia advocates or people who've been impacted by dementia don't have an understanding of science. I've got a PhD in science, so I really like getting involved in those types of projects because, I mean, their knowledge is way, way ahead of my knowledge, but I find it very exciting. And there are lots of people out there like that who you can get involved in your research, and will give you that sort of motivation and enthusiasm to keep going too.
Thanks so much. Following up on the same subject, but a question for the researchers. How was working with people living with dementia influenced your grant application?
I'll go with this first. I have had a fantastic experience. Yeah, really unexpectedly. I mean, it was just so good. I think it was. It also made me so much more passionate about what I was trying to look at, and it was so inspirational, to be honest. The enthusiasm was just fantastic. Um, uh, in fact, I think with a few of the questions that I was asked, it helped me write a travel grant as well, to try and address those questions. So for me, it was a very good experience, a very pleasant experience, and yeah, I couldn't say anything negative about it. It was very helpful, very, very helpful.
Yeah, I'll sort of echo as well. I think I would double click what the point that Jane mentioned, which took me most by surprise, was I mean, not by surprise, but it was how useful and beneficial it was talking in advance, just for actually constraining the project itself. Like a lot of the advocates have scientific backgrounds, and like the science itself, like just for actually like constraining my aims and like how I could even do the experiment was extremely useful, which was surprising. But then I guess my project, and I'm more sort of have a physics and computational background. So when I was talking about speaking and talking about like my potential approaches would use like either EEG or an fMRI as your data, little things like, well, actually practically you have to think about, putting a person in a scanner is fMRI is a bit more difficult. So maybe the EEG approach might be more useful. And so even just little things like that, we're framing the experiment, like my project was really, really useful, as well as just like the classic, just getting out and speaking about the project to someone out loud and sort of helping to, find sticking points and how that might could be constrained. I found unbelievably useful.
Both my dementia advocates were with a science background, and they were able to go over my entire proposal with me over Zoom. And and they were like, oh, maybe, this doesn't make sense if you say this first. Maybe you should say it a bit later, to say your proposal in a much more engaging way. And that's kind of very useful because the reviewers are going to be reading hundreds of grants, and if yours needs to stand out, your story needs to be told in an interesting way. And for that, the advocates played a major role in my application, where they were able to suggest like how I can rearrange my proposal to make it much more interesting and engaging.
Thank you all. Another question for Annette. I'm wondering whether I should try and apply for a project grant or postdoc grant, as I'm very early career researcher, just finishing the PhD by the end of the year.
I'm not really sure which one you should do either. I think Olivier might be able to answer this one as well, but I would have a think about what your project is and if it lends itself to a 2-year project grant or if it lends itself to a 3-year postdoc. And really, there's no harm if it's a similar project that you're looking at for both. There's no harm applying for both and seeing how you go. But I think some of the stuff Olivier was saying about have a think about, are you ready for this part of your research? Have a look at what is the project? Is it more just a pilot data project grant type of a thing? Or is this a more meaty fellowship that will really build your career?
Thank you. There were a few questions of early career researchers that don't have many publications or awards, and they wanted some advice on how can they make their career summary stand out a little bit more, although they don't have many publications. So if Annette and Oliver would like to give some advice on that.
Well, you can't make up things you don't have, and it's also relative to opportunity and your duration of your career. So when we read grant applications and we read that it's someone who's 1 year out of PhD, we will take that into account, as opposed to someone who's say 4, 5, 6 years out. Again, for me is as Annette was saying, you need to really think about, well, what it is that I want to do, and is it achievable within the framework or the scope of the funding. I think what you can do with the publications is, if you're not first author on a publication or last author, which is unlikely if you're an early career researcher, is to explain what your contribution to the paper was in a narrative way, or to weave that into your track record. So to demonstrate that, yep, you have skills to bring to the table, and you can essentially do the work.
There is also a question for the reviewers. So what are some of the key elements reviewers look for in travel grant applications?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. I can't remember last time I reviewed travel grant applications. But it's again, it's the same. It's around the same thing. You need to demonstrate that is value adds. You're not just going somewhere because it's a nice place and you want to have a nice holiday somewhere in Europe. You need to show that the lab that you're going to visit is going to bring something to your project that you couldn't get otherwise. I know that these days it's easy. You go, oh yeah, Zoom, and we can achieve that. Face-to-face interactions, you achieve so much more, and also in terms of your career, future career prospect, to be able to visit a lab is also important, and to be able to explain that, to create a meaningful professional relationship with the lab, that is on the other side of the world that will be beneficial to your long-term career-wise is important. So if you can sell that in a way that is realistic and achievable, again, that's a good point.
And I'll also add that it's really good if you can show a whole heap of value-adding aspects to your travel activities. So an application that just says I'm going to attend a conference isn't going to do as well as one where I'm presenting at a conference, I'm on the committee of a conference, and I'm visiting some collaborators while I'm there. So it's really just showing all these different things that you can do to build your professional development and your networks.
So you would say that a travel grant that is going to visit a lab and going to a conference will have more chance than someone that will go just for a conference?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. For the researchers, how much time did you spend in writing the application, and what were the barriers you found in writing the application?
So my application, the project was for another grant as well. And of course, with feedback, it just keeps getting better and better. So I had started way before, probably the year before, towards the end of the year before. But then in the new year, I started working on my Dementia Australia grant probably in February or something, even before the guidelines were out, just based on the previous year's guidelines. So I did start really early. I did get in touch with dementia advocates as well. I did get in touch with my AIs as well. Yeah, so it was pretty early.
My fellowship applications, I think I mentioned even in my talk that I had applied in my previous years as well. So I had a skeleton, but the skeleton kept on improving with each application, like wherever I applied. Like I used to add more, I used to remove some stuff, more exciting preliminary data would come in, which I would put into the grant. And the other important thing is making sure your team is good, like my AI. So I made sure I contacted my AIs first to make sure that they were comfortable in doing the proposed project and they were good to be in AI. Writing the actual grant was not didn't take long for me because it was just an improvement from the grant, but the successful and the subsequent revisions and editing was the most time consuming part, because as you are the author of your proposal, you kind of don't see the flaws. Even when you're reading a sentence, sometimes you don't see that sentence is wrong until another person reads a sentence and be like, no, that's a wrong way to say it. So I always say give it to multiple people. That's the part which takes up a lot of time when you're writing your proposal.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah, for the writing, and multiple attempts and constraining and taking feedback across years was, I think, I mean, unless you're a guru, I think it's really, really useful. Even if you don't think, if you're on the fence and hearing about people that have been successful and you're comparing yourself, I would still encourage you to definitely apply, because you will get that feedback and that's really invaluable and it'll help you constrain it. Like the application that was successful in the end for me was maybe like my two strong aims were probably a sub aim of one of my first aims, of a 3-aim thing. It was just, so it's just been constraining and simplifying and making each point more powerful and then adding some pilot data was, I think, really helpful. And that just came with revision and comments and some time thinking about it.
Thank you. Now, about the involvement with people with lived experience, there is a question of when first presenting your idea to individuals with lived or living experience of dementia, such as a steering committee, did you consider offering compensation for the initial involvement? If so, how do you approach this in a meaningful and appropriate way, especially if you are an early career researcher working without dedicated funding?
I think a lot of dementia advocates are very generous with their time. That's the experience I've had, at least. Yeah, they're very generous, and they want to see good research, and they're always willing to help. So initially, of course, I didn't have funding either, but I did manage to speak to them, and it's so I don't think funding constraints are such a problem in the beginning. They are always happy to give you feedback on your research. And probably once you get funding, then you can start, you can inform them that you have this in your budget. The dementia advocates I'm working with, they refuse to take any compensation. I'm still going to get them gift cards, but they have still refused to accept anything. So yeah, I don't think that should be something that's restricting you from getting in touch with dementia advocates and getting feedback from them on your proposed research. I think they're very generous with their time.
And I just support that. I mean, I think we understand the constraints that researchers are under. We understand that you don't have a budget to pay people at that early stage. And I know there's been some discussion maybe about NH and MRC making funding available for people at that really early stage. But I think you're right. Most of us are really keen to be involved, very happy to receive some funding if it's available, but completely understand if it's not. But it is becoming now more standard practice that you should include in your budget, at least once you get your funding, you'll have some way of paying people, and there are various ways of doing that. Some people choose not to be paid, and that's fine too. But others, makes a big difference. It means that the difference between getting involved and not getting involved. Say, for example, if they have to give up work time to perhaps spend some time getting involved in research activities. So, I don't think you should be constrained if you haven't already got funding, but perhaps look to making sure that you do have that funding secured if you do actually get the grant funded.
Another question for you, Jane.
Mm.
How do we avoid overburdening dementia advocates? Should we only be recruiting advocates via Dementia Australia to avoid advocates feeling obliged to provide input?
Oh, look, I think we're quite capable of saying no if we can't do it. I mean, and look, I think trust us to be able to say if we can't do it. I mean, there is an issue at the moment that I think a lot of the same people are getting involved in a lot of projects, and we need to make sure that there's some pathway to build up a stronger and more diverse group of people to get involved in research, and so that we don't end up having the same people involved in everything. I mean, I sit on many advisory groups for projects across different organisations, and then often it's the same people on those groups. So there's got to be a pathway to get more people involved, and so that researchers can actually find people to get involved in their research projects. How we do that, I'm not sure. I mean, that's Dementia Australia has got the Dementia Advocates program. There's a lot of people who aren't really part of that. A lot of people outside that who might be able to make a very valuable contribution to research. So how can we actually promote people to get involved, offer them training and support to do that? Because you do need a little bit of training. I think that's something we need to think about for the future.
Thank you, Jane. Another question, probably for Annette and Olivier. I'm looking to apply for the clinical practice postgraduate stipend. Are there any particular points or expectations reviewers typically look for that I should keep in mind when preparing my application?
With regards to the stipend, I think it's just having a good idea. I think the reviewers would look at the strength of the team as well, like your supervisors supporting you. I think the same principles that you apply for all the other applications would probably apply for this one as well. Again, your career, like your publications and things like that, might not be as strong as because you're only just starting out. So again, I think it's drawing on the experiences that you have today, how you've been involved in research, presentations and other things like that, that you can really boost up the career summary aspect of that application.
Annette, I have a question about the changes for the endorsement.
Mm-hmm.
So at which time point do the other authors will get the link? Is it when we finish the application, or is it during the application, just so we can people can think about the time that they need to
So what you will do is, when you're ready to send your application off for endorsement, there's a button for you to click, and it will send off all the relevant sections via email to your associate investigators. And so they just click on the link and then tick buttons, I think it is, and it's endorsed. And the same for the host institution as well. So there's a separate tab for that one, and you click it when you're ready for it to be sent off. So it goes when you click it. So I would just make sure that you follow up with your associate investigators to make sure that they have done it. You will see a little message to say it's completed in your application form, but I think it's a case of just giving them a few days to be able to do it, and talking to them beforehand, I guess, and know what their timelines are like, to make sure that it's done before the closing date.
So it is a separate button for the endorsement, and then when all the endorsement was signed, then you send the application. Is that correct?
Yes. You can endorse, the associate investigators can all come through, and then there's the next tab is the endorsement for the host institution. So you would click that one separately.
Okay, it's good for people to know that they will have to start doing that a lot before. Don't leave it for the last minute.
Get prepared early. Yeah.
Get prepared. Yeah. I have another question here for you, for Olivier, as well as a reviewer. Do we need preliminary results for a successful grant application? And would I still have a chance if my most recent publications are not related to dementia research?
Good one. Yeah. I'll start with the pilot data. If you have pilot data is particularly important if you are trialing something that is really new and unusual. Again, it comes back to a question of feasibility, and that it gets you somewhere in a meaningful way. If you're using, if you do, say, neuroimaging investigations, and you do straight off the bat structural MRI scans using whatever software, FreeSurfer, FSL, you don't need necessarily to demonstrate that you can do it. It would be more, for me, the assurance that you can have access to the number of participants that you need to do the research. However, if it's more cutting edge stuff, so that would require a little bit more convincing. The other point about the publications, it depends a little bit, is it really out of left field, completely different area of research? Again, what I'd like to see is that you have the skills to carry out the research. So, if it's in a parallel field, but that involves similar techniques or methods, then that's fine. If it's, if you're doing dementia research and you're telling me that your main research paper are in, I don't know, say political science or ecology of the something, then I'm wondering what is the relevance in that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the speakers. All your tips were amazing, really good. As a previous project grant also recipient, I can tell everyone that is watching now that everything that was said here is really, really important. And I am 100% sure I just got my project grant because I followed all the tips of the previous webinar. So my suggestion to everyone, just take all the tips that were said here. And I would like to go through a few key takeaways of today. First of all, the deadline is the 29th of July. Outcomes come early 2026. Please read the instructions. All the information is on the booklet. Start early and get people, senior researchers, to review and revise what you've done. Be careful with the terminology. Don't waste time and space just stating the obvious. So what is dementia? How many people are affected? Be realistic with your aims and your budget. And about the dementia advocates, researchers should not engage with people living with dementia and their carers only because it's a requirement for the grant applications. Their perspective is essential, particularly in basic science, where we don't have any direct contact. They can help ensure that the research questions, the methods, and the outcomes are meaningful and relevant to those most affected by dementia. Engagement should not only be limited to the period before submitting a grant. Instead, it should occur throughout the research journey, from shaping the project's design to discuss findings and their implications as well. This ongoing dialogue will strengthen the quality, the impact, and real-world relevance of our work. So I would like to share my screen. So as mentioned by some of the speakers, the Sydney Dementia Network has a lived experience expert advisory panel, the LEAP, where it's composed with people living with dementia, current and former carers. They are highly experienced and contributing to research discussions and are often involved in evaluating the grant applications. Their perspective is invaluable for ensuring that our research is relevant, is clearly communicated, and aligns with the needs and the priorities of the most affected by dementia. So it helps the researchers to communicate their work in a way that is accessible and meaningful as well. What we do is project discussions in Zoom meeting sessions, usually 3 projects per meeting, and each researcher has 20 minutes with the lead panel that they can use as fit. And if you would like more information and you would like to present your project to and have input from the lead panel, you can send an email to me. And you're gonna send me a little bit of information of your project so we can send to the lead panel before the meeting. We also have a mailing list for the Sydney Dementia Network, where we have quarterly newsletters and ad hoc bulletins, where you can get information about events, dementia news, study recruitment relevant to the members, information about grants. And if you would like to join the Dementia Network mailing list, we have here the barcode. And you can also submit to the email of the Sydney Dementia Network. I would like to thank, oh, sorry, just stop sharing. I would like again to thank all the speakers and all the researchers and with people of lived experience and Annette. This was very valuable, and I'm pretty sure that it will be very helpful for all the applicants. And I hereby end this webinar. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all your help. Thank you.